Thank you very much, Ekene Undulue, for that elaborate background. With us in the studios and elsewhere to join this conversation, let's welcome Dr. Philip Hayab. He's a teacher and peace advocate as well as conflict analyst. Thank you for being around.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Hayab. Also here in the studios, would like to welcome Professor Muhammad Kuta Yahaya, a peace advocate. Professor Yahaya, welcome to Good Morning Nigeria.
It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
And Professor Yahaya actually was the convener in peace building activity engagement in normal conversation on rethinking and uniting Nigeria under the auspices of collective action for harmony and development. All right, and from our Just Studio, we have with us here this morning Joseph Lemang, Director General, Plateau Peace Building Agency. Sir, you're welcome to the program.
For having me. Good morning, Nigeria.
And also from our Kaduna studio, we have Dr. Saleh Omale, Executive Vice Chairman, Kaduna State Peace Commission. It's good to have you with us this morning.
Listeners in Nigeria and around the world.
All right, gentlemen, once again, we welcome you to the program. Oh, but as well, just start this conversation from our Just Studios, where Kirian introduced Joseph Langman a moment ago. He's the Director General of the Plateau Peace Building Agency. And Langman, of course, we know from our background report that Plateau State instituted what it calls a Forgiveness Day in 2019. That's about 3 years ago. It would appear that after each Forgiveness Day, there's even more bloodletting and conflict in that state. What is the whole idea of the Forgiveness Day, and is it working?
Thank you so much. You know, what happened yesterday, which is the 7th of February, a day that was specially set aside by His Excellency, the Governor of Plateau State, as Plateau State Forgiveness Day, is one among series of other, initiatives and interventions that the current administration, led by His Excellency Right Honorable Samuel Bakola Long, Executive Governor of Plateau State, has put out as a state response to issues of peace and security in Plateau State since he assumed office on the 29th of May 2015. Peace and security has been the hallmark of his governance. Has been the pillar of his policy trust. And these basically came about following the failure of successive, administrations to nip in the bud, the outbreak of ethno-religious crisis, other forms of intercommunal conflicts, etc., etc. So the focus of the government essentially is to see how best we can prevent, identify issues of conflict at their latent stage, and being able to mobilize resources, stakeholders working together with a view to de-escalate tension, in that respect. So peace building, conflict prevention is very central to the focus of what the current administration is doing, as evident also by the setting up of the Plateau State Peace Building Agency, which represents our own state's dedicated institutional framework for conflict transformation and peace building. So these are some of the steps that the government has taken. Of course, you know the story of Plateau State nearly 20 years ago, the different episodes of violence that we've seen and the devastating consequences these violence have had on the social and economic development of the state. The current administration indeed, inherited a near chaotic security, if not anarchic security situation. So these steps became very, very important. And it has helped significantly, looking at what happened, nearly 2 decades ago in Plateau State, because there is a decline, I would say, in the spate of intracommunal or intercommunal conflict, interreligious conflict. But we are not, like you said, living under the illusion, like the governor also alluded to yesterday in the speech, that permanent peace has returned to the state despite all of these steps and measures that we are taking. Of course, while the government is working assiduously to ensure or to deliver on the promise of peace and security, there are still pockets of individuals who are equally very determined to ensure that they take us back. And that explains, the pockets of these attacks that you hear, the pockets of violence that, once in a while you hear here and there. However, looking at the general picture, one could argue very strongly that there is a general decline in the spate of violent conflict in Plateau State compared to, say, 10 or 15 years ago. And for us, that is a very big achievement. Whether we've been able to deal with all of the issues of the conflict and whether we're able to stop the pockets of skirmishes that we see and violence is an open question. But what is very obvious to everyone who is a keen follower of what is happening in Plateau State is that issues of peace and security is very central to the governor. He has deployed some of the best resources that you can think of, whether human or material, in addressing these challenges. And the reality is that we do not expect that these things are just going to disappear overnight, because we are living and operating in a very diverse, in a very complex setting and context, and where sometimes the success of even the initiative of the governor and the government does not depend largely on him alone, but of course on other external variables and other contexts playing out, because of course as a federation, Nigeria is a system that is made up of coordinated units, and if there is a disarticulation or a dysfunction in one of the units, it has a way of reflecting in the system. So for us on the plateau, we'll say we have taken the right step, and I think the governor to a large extent has written his name in gold, having moved us away from this security-centric kind of approach to peace and conflict to being proactive. And what that means for us is that we are working, or for the very first time, individuals and communities, conflict parties, are put in the center of negotiations and discussions and conversations and dialogue with a view to have their buy-in so that collectively we can transform the very conditions that engender violent conflict in Plateau State.
Thank you. We are going to return to you to visit some specific skirmishes, as you call them, because it has continued unabated. Because we were able to interrogate, the outcomes, of some of these efforts of government, as you have said. But there's no doubt the fact that the tempo has reduced drastically, but the conflict really continues. Thank you indeed. Let's go to Kaduna, where we have Dr. Saleh Momale, Executive Vice Chairman, Kaduna State Peace Commission. Let us know what the government of Kaduna State is doing, because Kaduna is, as a matter of fact, one of the epicenters of conflict in northwest of Nigeria. Let us know the efforts government is making. You've just listened to our guest in Jos, as he enumerated some of the actions taken by the administration in Plateau State with respect to ensuring that a peace returns on the plateau. Now, what is going on in Kaduna State? Because, of course, we've had a number of kidnappings and banditry, killings, and what have you. Just yesterday or so, we had that a Catholic priest has been kidnapped, his cook killed, and money is removed. So what is happening in Kaduna State?
Thank you very much once again for bringing up this topical issue for national discourse. Like you rightly observed, Kaduna State, as one of the states within the Northwest geopolitical zone, is facing serious challenges of insecurity that has to deal with the issues of banditry and other rural crimes. This is a very serious challenge for not only Kaduna State and the Northwest, but the country as a whole. Secondly, there are also some inter-ethnic tensions and crises, as well as conflicts between pastoral and farming communities in different parts of the state. Similar to the initiative in Plateau State, recognizing the need for sustained engagement with varied stakeholders, with communities, with traditional rulers and religious leaders. The government of Kaduna State, I think since about 2015, initiated a lot of actions that will help the state in addressing these challenges. There was a committee that was set up to review the conflict situations within the state and make recommendations to government, one of which was the need to create an agency that will dedicate itself to addressing some of these issues. And I think that finally gave birth to the Kaduna State Peace Commission, which was established sometimes in 2017. And I think since then, the Commission has been engaging varied stakeholders with varying level of success in its interventions and activities. Overall, we will not say that Kaduna State has been able to address entirely the conflicts, but substantially most of the drivers have been addressed, and the level of intercommunity violence has significantly reduced. For example, if we take the urban cities of Kaduna, Zaria, and Kafanchan, we will notice a significant decline in inter-ethnic and inter-religious violence within these cities. And I think this is a very positive development for us to witness relative calm and understanding within our urban areas. Moving back to the other parts of the state, if we look at the northern senatorial zone, the level of conflicts between farming and pastoral communities within this area, which was one of the major conflicts, have significantly reduced, and you rarely hear violent skirmishes between farming and pastoral communities. If we come back to the central senatorial zone as well, the level of conflicts within the farming and pastoral communities have also significantly declined. And one of the major conflicts that has bedeviled the central senatorial zone, particularly in Kajuru and some few parts of Chukun local government, happily enough, I think throughout last year, we have not witnessed violent skirmishes between these communities, and I think this is a substantial progress. If we move to the southern senatorial zone, we could see still that the level of conflicts in certain local governments, particularly like Jamaa and Sanga, which used to witness some of these, as well as Kauru, particularly the border areas between Kauru local government and Bassa local government in Plateau State. While the conflicts in some other local governments have substantially reduced, we have also seen a spike in conflicts between the border areas of Plateau in in Bassa local government and Kauru in Kaduna State. And I think this is a joint initiative where we are presently working with the Plateau Peace Building Agency to address some of these drivers and to see what can we collectively do, to de-escalate tensions. So overall, we can say that the major challenge now that has bedeviled the state at a larger extent are the criminal activities, mostly perpetrated by various banditry groups, as well as the ongoing conflicts in Zangon Kataf, particularly the Atiap chiefdom, as well as some of the most recent ones, which we have seen in parts of Kaugoro chiefdom in Kaduna State, in Kaura local government. But we are all working together to see how best we work with, first of all, the governments at the center, the local government administrations, the traditional leaders, as well as other civil society groups that are very active in the state and who are providing a lot of supportive role. So you can see that the state government, in terms of policies, have put up the Kaduna State Peace Commission, has put up policies that will regulate the preachings and other religious activities, so that we will have some level of appreciable intervention and control of the excesses that are done by some of the religious preachers that we used to witness in the state. So overall, we are looking at the holistic peace environment, but we need to do a lot more in terms of providing permanent reconciliation that will lead to more sustainable communities, more peaceful communities than we presently have. And these are the efforts that is before us, and I believe also the Plateau Peace Building Agency now and in the forthcoming months and years.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Saleh Mamale, for the broad explanations that you have provided. We will return to you in the course of the conversation to further interrogate some of the issues that you raised. Once again, thanks a lot, Dr. Mamale. Let's come back to our Abuja studios. Professor Kuta Yahaya, you listen to the other guests. Some persons would argue that reconciliation cannot be decreed or legislated, or that it is not an automatic process, it is gradual. Now, despite the good news, for instance, coming out of Plateau and Kano, as indicated by the other two guests, the evidence would seem to suggest that violent conflict remains endemic in various parts of the country. And that while peace-building efforts may be working in some localities, such peace-building efforts are unraveling elsewhere in the country. What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much, Kingsley, and let's appreciate the efforts of those governments at various levels, and I know and I recall previous experiences by the Northern States Governors Forum around 2013 to establish a committee under Ambassador Zachary Ibrahim to go around the northern states, tagged the Committee on Reconciliation, Healing and Security. And it came out with very serious observations and recommendations, which was an eye-opener for many of us. I was the coordinator of that committee. It lasted almost 1 year, and it was really, really quite revealing. The report is there. Kingsley, let me not hide the fact that if you try to address the issue and you have not gone to the fundamental triggers or causes of this, you don't address those causes, you are going to be superficial, and then it will continue to come back at you. But if you take the issues from environmental to cultural to economic, and the biggest, the political, which involve contestations that are premised on inequalities, inequities, injustices, those are the seeming background triggers. So for us to have and address the issues, we must of necessity address some of these issues that we have, that will continue to breed issues of hate, that are generating hate speech and reactions in the communities, and total collapse of love, right from family level to communal level and to inter or intrastate, interstate and national level. These are some of the things. Before now, you will agree with me that we are our brother's keepers. In every community, people care for what is happening. But look at it now. When an accident happens these days, instead of people to go for help, people will carry camera to go and start taking pictures of what is happening and start sending it to social media. So there is like a collapse totally of what we used to have traditionally as love that permeates our cultural orientation. So we must of necessity look at it beyond the superficial arrangement of committees, do this, do that. Well, they are good. Beyond kinetic considerations, they are good. Because dialogue, negotiations, arbitrations are the key elements in peace building. But we as a nation now must go beyond government interventions. Government alone cannot do it all, because the expectation at each point in time is that even the collapse of trust is also a function of the trigger. You need to look at issues beyond the governmental intervention, even though the responsibility of government at all levels, as prescribed by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, is security and welfare of citizens, is the primary purpose of government. That is fundamental. But then, we as citizens, we need to have our own input, inbuilt mechanisms. You realize that the environmental issues, whoever tell you that climate change is not a reality is dreaming, because of a lot of changes in the environment, resource distribution, resource availability, resource access, and access to political power are some of the triggers that, if not managed by the principal actors from community to state and to national level, will continue to escalate tension. That is, by the time you cover it in one level, it will appear in another level, and these are some of the things that we need to understand. And I believe we need to be fast in citizens' engagement. We need to have the confidence of citizens in our programs, in our policies, and it is total and holistic approach that can bear us out, whereby every stakeholder in the community, in the state, and in the nation must be interested in this peace-building process.
Well, I think one of the fundamental points that you have made here, have to do with the issue of the triggers, of these insecurity. Now, let's come to Hayab. When you talk about insecurity in the northern part of the country, banditry, seems to be at the center stage, because of their capacity to overrun villages, attack people, and kidnap as many people as possible. And some people who have actually experienced kidnapping did say that, look, while with them in the forest, they say a few things, as to look, that they are a neglected part of the society, that they need education, that they need some form of security, that nobody cares about them, that they have taken to banditry because of what they feel that they have been alienated and what have you. There may not be enough reason, actually, to go into banditry, so to speak, but what I want to ask is, what do you think that government at national level and also at subnational level should be doing with respect to engage this section of Nigerians who have decided to go to the bush and, of course, institute their own government? What are those mechanisms that could be put in place, to checkmate the activities of banditry in the northern part of Nigeria?
Thank you. To my mind, from the beginning of the banditry, when it was far off Sokoto, maybe we were hearing it from Zamfara, and then it moved to Abuja-Kaduna Road. And then the next thing, it is Kafanchan, Kaduna Road. I come from Kafanchan, and I have to go to Kaduna almost every time. Truly, when I was growing up as a student, we would leave Zaria maybe 10 p.m. and come home, and we were not afraid of anything. If anybody crosses the road, that person was going to be maybe one villager or someone traveling who is stranded, and you could even stop to assist them. Nobody ever thought that it was possible that we will begin to have cases where people are taken for ransom and all that. So to my mind, maybe government was not very proactive at the beginning, because it was looking, when it started, for instance, in the case of Kaduna, which I can speak very well, I thought the government started to look at the situation as if it was going to be one-sided. Unfortunately, it turned out to take the whole state by surprise, because the banditry activity actually began more in the southern part of Kaduna State. And then, so when we were crying foul, the government didn't pay the attention that they needed to pay at that time. Now, so if someone complains that because they've been neglected, that is why they take into banditry, there are other people who have never been taken care of, who have not taken into banditry. So I think it became a lucrative business, and since some were making money and no proactive action was taken to nip the situation in the bud, the participation increased and broadened. And now in our localities in Kaduna City, people are taken from their homes. So when I heard Dr. Momale said in the city we've made some progress, well, it's not the case. In areas like Sabontesha, areas like Gonungora, areas like Barnawa in Kaduna, which are actually in Kaduna South and Chikun local government, people are taken from their homes. 2-3 weeks ago, in a place we call it Bagi Villa, bandits stormed that community around 9 p.m. and shot a very young man who has 2 children, and then he was gone and gone forever. Then the wife and kids, the wife was pregnant as at that time, and then I think there was another kid, they were kidnapped. We had to some of our friends had to open a platform so that monies would be put together. So there's a level of, to my mind also, is that there's this level of inhumanity which is growing on the side of these people, perpetrators, wherever they come from. Unfortunately, Nigeria is trying to shy away, but statistics seems to show that most of the people involved in banditry so far, from the phone calls that we get, people who negotiate for ransom tend to come from a particular ethnic group. Now, this ethnic group has a structure. They have traditional leaders, they have elders. This is Africa. They could be engaged, and then maybe they get some of the youths who are not so deep into it, and they talk. So once we fail to start up talking, we will still come back to talking at the end of the day, but by this time maybe we would have all been consumed. May God never let it to happen to that extent.
Dr. Philip Hayab, yes. And gentlemen, I think it's useful for, again, the purpose of the conversation. Our key focus is on conflict resolution and reconciliation. I was just wondering, Kirian, banditry relates more to criminal activities. And these criminals, they are, if you like, they are roaming criminals. Now, some of the violent conflicts that we have seen are staged on territorial grounds. That is to say, one village versus another, and then sometimes when they are unable to engage each other, they now import mercenaries to come, and rout them or raise them, and then send them away from their homes. And the issue now becomes, look, your IDPs, X, Y, Z. So banditry, of course, has also come into all of this. But banditry, technically, isn't a conflict. It's a criminal activity, criminal enterprise. Although some persons could say that some of the constitutive factors arise from, conflicts in communities and so on and so forth. I just thought that, because there are pertinent issues that you have raised, plus the other guests, and I want to go back to our Just Network studios. Lemang, that's Joseph Lemang, who is the DG of the Plateau Peace Building Agency. Professor Yahaya, in identifying one of the drivers of conflict, and therefore the difficulty in attaining true reconciliation, did talk about political contestation. And that sometimes formal agencies like yours, I'm not saying in particular Plateau or like Kaduna, tend to occasionally, if not always, walk around some of the more contentious drivers of conflict. In Plateau, for instance, I've heard that, some of the latest rounds of killings that are reported, they are all politically related. They are all aimed at politics transition 2023, who will gain the upper hand, and so on and so forth. If that is the case, what is being done to address it, or must bloodletting precede each political season?
Thank you so much. We talked about how we have moved from, intercommunal conflict to crass criminality. Banditry, of course, is one of them, and it's something that basically security agencies are working very hard to deal with. But, while it is difficult to pin down or analyze the causes of conflict, to one single intervening variable. Usually it's a combination of so many things playing out at different levels. Political contestation, of course, is just one of such. But for us here on the plateau, of course, we're seeing so many other variables in the basket. But how we approach it, of course, it comes back to the question of what steps, policy measures, and has the government put in place to address these inadequacies, so address these issues or drivers, causes or drivers of conflict. While the security dimension is there, and of course the kinetic, but we are focusing, like you have also advised, essentially on the non-kinetic. And what that means is how stakeholders, whether political or traditional institutions or religious institutions or the civil society groups or even the media, how are we working together to nip these issues in the bud? I mean, how do we manage potentially dangerous conflict situations, one of which, of course, is conflict that arises as a result of political contestations. Yesterday, if you heard the governor while he was giving his speech, he made mention of the fact that we are already headed into an election year, and the likelihood of politicians causing havoc as a result of their political interests is equally very, very high. And he made a call that we should think and reflect. There is absolutely no point of bringing down the whole roof upon everybody's head simply because you have a political ambition. And so that was clearly addressed by the governor. And for us at the level of the Peace Building Agency, we have carried out a series of awareness campaigns. I think right from the first year that the Peace Building Agency came into life, into existence, working with political stakeholders to ensure that we prevent the likelihood of election-related violence before the elections, during the elections, and even after the elections, because one of the issues that we've had in the past in Plateau State is that such conflicts of contestations or political contestations that are not well managed often, escalate and into violence, and from there it mutates into even ethno-religious crisis because of how the actors tend to manipulate their followers and also the public or the society in general. So there are quite a number of deliberate steps that we have taken. Like I've said, the question of awareness and peace messaging and working directly with some of these political parties. We have facilitated a number of peace accords before elections in 2019, and which has helped so much in dousing tension that otherwise would have seen an escalation into another perhaps episode of ethno-religious crisis or violence as a result of electoral disputes. The local government elections were held earlier last year, and it was very peaceful against all, the pundits, the analysis, the notion that if elections, for example, were to be, was to hold in Jos North, which, of course, like we all know, is one of the hotbeds of violent conflict in the past. People said no, elections shouldn't even hold there because of the potential of violence. But the governor insisted, and through the efforts of the Peace Building Agency and civil society organizations, and also religious leaders, I think I couldn't count the number of dialogues and engagements that were held with the view to foster mutual understanding and cooperation between the political class. That significantly helped so much that it happened for the very first time, elections in Jos North without any bloodshed. And that gives us hope. It gives us hope to the fact that beyond the challenges that government faces, and beyond the notion also that often some of these steps are superficial, we have seen results, and results being that it appears as if people have evolved, learning lessons from those horrific experiences of the past. We are not saying that there are no issues. Of course, the conditions, the causes of most of this conflict are there, in some cases even unaddressed. But the question is whether, people who have faced the brunt or suffered the brunt of violence, want to continue in this unending cycle of violence, in the face of the inability to deal with some of these structural issues, or perhaps some of these political issues, should ordinary communities just fold their arms and be consumed in this inferno? And so from the Plateau experience, we have seen people learning to live and coexist side by side, peacefully, regardless of the political differences, regardless of the ethnic differences, regardless of the religious differences. And I think because we have evolved, we have learned through our experiences, and we are beginning to understand that we stand to benefit more. The peace dividends will reach everybody if we are in peace, and then we have the capacity to work together to put pressure on government to address the underlying issues or the root causes of violent conflict in Plateau State. And I think we are evolving as a model, I think to a large extent, to the rest of the country. Yes, in Plateau State, there is also, like I've said earlier, on the transformation of intercommunal conflicts into criminality and all of that. Banditry and kidnappings once in a while happens, of course, not on the scale that we see 10, 15, or 20 years ago. Peace building is a process, and we keep saying this. It is not, something that you invest in today and tomorrow you see results immediately. You have to change the mindsets of a people who have been touched by adversity and have, over time developed these very dangerous, or poisonous assumption about the other. You have to address the legacies of nearly 2 decades of violent conflict, which has to do with mutual distrust, with suspicion, which has to do with resentment and hate and consternation of an overstaying power. I do not think that it is something that we can engage with these issues and see results immediately. It is a process that needs to be carefully nurtured and crafted in a way that gives us result on a very sustainable level. And of course, whether we are determined, to deal with these issues as a government or not, what I can tell you is that I have seen communities here in Plateau State, I have seen stakeholders here in Plateau State who have learned over the years and are working together as a cohort, in order to do extraordinary feat for peace. And of course, this followed the policies of the government, the ideas, the strategies, and the mechanisms that the Plateau State Peace Building Agency has put on the ground, such that we are working together with them to address these conflict issues at their latent stage and dealing with the issues such that it does not escalate into violent conflict. That is our role as an institution set up by law to ensure that people learn to deal with their issues amicably. Issues of security provisioning is, of course, a role and responsibility for the security agencies. Of course, the nexus or the relationship between peace and security is well established. Of course, the mechanisms are totally different, even though mutually reinforcing. And I think that is what we are bringing on the table, that beyond focusing much on the security aspect, there is a need for us to put in place mechanisms that will deal with the non-security issues, but that at the end of the day, if these issues are not well managed, it becomes a security issue. And that is what I think the Plateau Peace Building Agency and also the Kaduna State Peace Commission are working on. And we, like my friend Dr. Salim Omale said earlier, we work together to deal with cross-border issues. Within the last 3 years, for example, the issues of Chawe in Basa local government and the Fulanis and the Birom and even the Aten people in Ghana in Riom local government is something that we have worked collaboratively, and we are still working collaboratively to address as a non-security mechanism or framework. And it has proven, effectively to be very, very productive in that sense. Based on the results that we have seen, based on the decline of attacks and counterattacks from one community to the other, based on the kind of mutual understanding that is fostered and the sustainability of that effort going forward. That is what gives us hope. And we are advocating very strongly. Personally, I would continue to advocate that there is a need for us to pay attention on the conflict prevention and peace building process as much as we pay attention or put attention and efforts on security provisioning. These things have to go simultaneously, one complementing the other. Because
all right, Joseph, we appreciate your concern and, of course, the energy that the Plateau State government is putting in this is quite commendable. We just hope that as that takes place, let there be no more conflict in that part of the country. Let's return to Kaduna, where we have Dr. Salah Bomale. You've listened to Joseph in Jos. So why I'm making reference to that is because, of course, what happened in Jos is no much of a difference. There's a nexus between what happens there and what happens in Kaduna State. There are some issues or points raised, on what are the triggers, political contestations, inequality, environmental issues. How do all these play out from your experience in what happens in Kaduna State, especially the southern part of Kaduna, where we have witnessed, attacks on communities, different conflicts among communities in the southern part of Kaduna? And again, what should be the role of traditional rulers of those communities? How is the government of Kaduna State engaging these traditional rulers and, of course, the communities involved in conflicts, especially in the southern part of Kaduna State?
Thank you so much for bringing up again, and thank you for the contributions from all the other discussants. And I think Professor Yahaya has put quite a number of issues in context. The challenges of dealing with the political class, the challenges with dealing with, I can call them in group, elitist advocacy groups who have their own rational reasons and perceptions about how governance, how development, and how any other issue should be organized, whether on the basis of a particular regionality or section of a region and things related to that. And then we also have the delicate religious balancing that has to be done, especially between the two major religious groups, Christianity and Islam, and the key players within these two religious landscape, their perceptions, how they feel and how they interpret events, and the communities who are often the recipients of various messaging and kind of information, and of course the media, which shapes opinions, which projects the views and perceptions of groups, individuals, or societies, depending on the area in which their inclination lies most. So understanding the dynamics and trying to balance these dynamics is a huge task. For us, I believe, not only in Kaduna State, but also in Plateau, the challenges, like you rightly say, are quite similar in many areas, even though they are slightly different, maybe in one or two, in two areas. So for us, I think the most easiest to deal with, and those that gives you the fastest level of understanding, based on our practical experience, are the communities. We have seen a lot of communities that have witnessed violent conflicts, who are prepared to reconcile, who are prepared to live together, and who within a short period of time, you can be able to deliver messages and create the right kind of understanding that will enable them to see reason for them to coexist and live peacefully. And I think Dr. Joseph Lengman just made allusion to that. So, but the most difficult groups to deal with are the elitist groups as well as the political class. They have their own rationale, they have their own ambitions, they have what they want to achieve. So when it comes to election period, like you earlier mentioned, it's a very critical period and it's a delicate moment for the citizens as well as for other organizations, but including civil society that are interested in peace building. So I think this is the areas where we need to focus and where we have to do a lot of work. The next one you mentioned about traditional rulers. In my understanding, in terms of community governance, now we have been talking about constitutional roles for traditional leaders. In my understanding, the best contribution of the traditional institutions is in uniting rural communities, in uniting urban communities to live together, to understand each other, and to live in peace and harmony. To try to create a common understanding and peaceful, these messages of peaceful coexistence is best related to communities through the traditional institutions. And I think our national, states, and local governments need to give so much attention to these traditional institutions, to support them, to build their capacity, to support them to understand inclusive processes, how to bring in every citizen that lives within their domain, listen to those communities, and ensure the needs of every group that exists within any particular area is adequately catered for. They have the capacity to pass the right messaging to grassroots community members and to bring them together. They have the highest opportunities for creating empathy, love, and understanding. The next group that are very close to our rural communities, to our urban communities, to all our citizens are the religious leaders. And I think because we said Nigeria is a secular state, there has been some misinterpretations about this issue of secularism. Secularism is that the state is not going to support or is not going to align to one particular faith. It does not imply that the state should neglect those critical religious institutions, religious bodies, and religious leaders. I think bringing in these religious institutions, religious leaders, and religious bodies together and making them to work together, particularly the interfaith dialogues, and enabling them to understand the needs, the pains, and the realities of the adherents of the other religion will be very important in providing them the needed knowledge, the needed wisdom to preach to their members, to preach to their adherents, those that respect them so much on the need for understanding the ideals, the practices, and the rationale, as well as the thinking of the other religious group, as well as enabling them to become more tolerant, more accommodative, and more empathetic to the adherents of the other religions. I think if we strengthen these two groups, we will begin to address what Professor Yahaya correctly addressed as the growing hatred, as the growing division, and the fact that people are no longer as empathetic, as they used to be. He cited some examples, very sad indeed. So this is where we have to go. For us, we have to continue to work with our governments, and I know Dr. Lengman and myself, we have always talked about this. How do we engage the top political leaders, the local government chairmen, the governors, the commissioners, and every other person, including the leadership of the political parties? We have to continue to engage them. How do we engage them? By trying to strengthen that note that in your quest to attract political followers, you should not ignite political tensions, ethnic tensions, or religious tensions. You must do your politics without bitterness, find other means of wooing electorates, not using conflicts, violence, or insecurity as a means of discrediting any political actor, any government, or any institution. I think if the media will help us to discredit political leaders who will try to woo electorates on the basis of insecurity and violence, we will go a long way in addressing some of this negative politicking that we used to see. Happily for us, in the local government elections, but in Plateau and here in Kaduna State, we have done a lot with respect to this. We have done a lot in respect to engaging communities. But finally, creating awareness and engaging citizens on a sustained manner, creating the right understanding that every political actor at one particular point in time is interested in winning electors and getting his votes and being elected. And if you align to him and allow yourself to fall into conflict and violence based on either political, ethnic, or religious differences, then you will pay the prices more than the political actors. This awareness is very critical to ensuring that we continue on the path to peace. Then the final point I want to make, I think Dr. Lengman correctly mentioned that. You see, funding peace building is not a good political dividend because it is not seen as a road, it will not be seen as a hospital, nobody will see it, people will live in peace. For example, how many conflicts, who has asked, how many conflicts through the interventions of the governments, the security establishment, how many conflicts have been prevented? But the few ones that occur are just the ones that people know. So it's not a good political dividend for anybody if he invests so much in peace building. So we are also appealing to all the political leadership from the federal to the states and local governments that investments in peace building, investment in security, investment in citizens' engagement is one of the major political dividends that we should invest in.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Momale. We allowed you to ride on with the many points you were articulating. And of course, we will have to take a short break. And when we return from the short break, we will be dealing with some of those issues. In particular, the takeoff point from Professor Yahaya's issue relating to political contestation and your response, as well as that of Legman, to see how the manipulative political class can be reined in for their own and then society's benefit at large, and how more essentially to ensure that peace building is regarded as a political dividend, because peace is a predicate for social production. We'll take a short break now on Good Morning Nigeria. All right, you're welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria. We're live on NTA's network service. All our 4 guests are still with us in Kaduna, Jos, and here at the Abuja studios. So now back to our 2 guests in the Abuja studios. Professor Kuta Yahaya, let's take a look at this as well, one dimension to conflict resolution and reconciliation. Nigeria has not had a shortage of approaches to conflict resolution and reconciliation. We have had peace conferences, peace meetings. If you bring in the traditional rulers, they have their own forum where they have dialogues on peace. If you bring in the religious leaders, they have interfaith dialogue also on peace. You were mentioning a committee for the northern region, northern states at some point. Paperwork is aplenty on identifying the triggers of conflict, what needs to be done. Sometimes these are kept on the shelf, and back again, we are having all of these crises. And then the political dimension to this. Are we sincere with ourselves in truly achieving peace and reconciliation?
Thank you very much for the opportunity once again. I want to say with full sense of responsibility that while we try to address the issues, we must also respect the issue of stimulus response mechanism in conflict situations. As he said, there is what we call tangible and intangible, outcomes and interventions. Some interventions by the political class, when they think about next elections, is to go for the tangible, what people can see as evidence. But the intangibles, they are the ones that you don't see or you don't touch, but you can feel. And this issue of peace building is a fundamental part of the intangible interventions. Let me look at some of those stimulus response issues. The issue of drugs, the issue of youth activism in the political space, when people will go and buy drugs and give to young people to go and carry out carnage and other violent activities. Some will go to the extent of even buying arms to arm these young people. These are stimulus issues that can trigger multiple outcomes in terms of conflict. So to say we are sincere, the same political elite need to be integrated into this conversation so that they will appreciate their roles in the stimulus and response in the conflict situation that we have with us. In this circumstance, I'll give you a very good example about the much paperwork you said. By the time the Northern State Committee submitted its reports to the president, then president, in 2013, another committee again was established by the federal government to do exactly the same reconciliation, because some people felt, why should it be governors that should be doing this, federal government should do its own. Members of the same committee were poached to constitute another committee that went round again, just to repeat the same thing. Maybe even copying the same report and submitting, and money would have been spent. So is it about spending money or the sincerity that you talked about, Kingsley? If we are not sincere, even at implementation, we will not get it right. So I'm looking for a situation where all the principal actors at every level will be sincere and will be committed. And one good example, the war against drugs. Everybody in Nigeria today is aware that the leadership of Buba Marwa is fighting drugs headlong. The haulage at the ports at different levels is not only commendable, but is a step towards addressing the stimulus of some of these things. So what I want from all the political class at state and federal level, wherever there are triggers or there are issues of stimulus, they must be sincere to address them so it won't escalate into multiple conflict reactions based on this stimulus. So for me, I feel the media is a principal actor in this endeavor. As you are aware, the emergence of the new media has created another dimension, because it's like the issue of control, regulatory, and sanctions are not available. You can just pick your even mobile phone and you are on, and somebody will believe. There was a leader of an institution yesterday. I saw an elaborate, impossible news item, and I contacted the head of the institution. He sent me back the response of the head of the online media, discrediting that story, that they didn't get the approval before it was released. So it's fake news. Nobody was punished because there are no laws to punish such. Meanwhile, you may not be aware, and I'm sure you're aware, Kingley, that there are social media warlords that have been paid specifically to discredit either a leader or a government or an institution and create panic, disaffection, and hate. So you need counter-narrative to be able to check and illuminate the positive aspect. But sometimes it may be too late. Maybe based on the information available through the fake news, brothers and neighbors would have started fighting, killing each other before they realize what the truth is. It might be too late. So therefore, we need an opportunity of positive engagement of media actors through continuous interface, training and retraining, so that the issue of patriotism and consciousness and love for our country should become uppermost in the minds of the proprietors and agents of some of this media.
All right, gentlemen, over the years, successive governments at various levels have indeed articulated, or rather evolved the strategies, towards ending security challenges or conflict in the country. We have just mentioned off camera a short while ago about conflicts of conflicts among communities that have lasted over 40 years, unending, even after resolutions, after agreeing to reconcile with each other, then after a while, the thing will erupt again and continue. So why this sustained, enmity or sustained conflict after reconciliation? Or is there a better process of achieving this? I want you to come in, Hayab. You are from Kaduna. We, of course, we know we have a lot of these conflicts. Why is it that after resolving a conflict, after arriving at a reconciliatory level, after a while, we will now go back again into the same conflicts that brought about the conflict resolution? How can this be finally settled? Or is it not a possibility? Or should government, I don't know, evolve strategies from the outer space, to see how this can happen? Because from all indications, these conflicts are unending even after reconciliation. I give it to the Plateau State government. What it's doing is commendable. Year after year they do a commemoration of Forgiveness Day and what have you. Yet we still have pockets of conflicts among communities in Plateau.
Okay, thank you. First, if a person has been hurt, there are so many ways, maybe just a few ways to. One, we need to right the wrong. I think in most negotiations that we've been engaging, we have failed to right the wrong. One of the examples, for instance, when the government of Kenya was talking about Mau Mau, the British government apologized. The then Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, he was not born by the time the Mau Mau crisis erupted. But because there was evidence to show that this Mau Mau, the people people were not treated fairly, the government of Britain apologized. An apology has a way of healing. Now, so in most cases, in our country, to my mind and from what I've read, there is no apology. And even when there is apology, the apology is not sincere. So we go back to the point Prof made about sincerity of purpose. I am engaged in peace building work, and I go to places and I see, after hugging and everything, people signed memorandum of understanding. We've had that in some local governments. 1 week later, there will be a crisis or there will be a conflict. And it won't be surprising that the people who actually signed this memorandum of understanding will be key players, maybe at the background. The reason is that they were not genuinely committed to the peace process. It was a show. Now we have to move away from shows to being genuinely committed to peace building. So we would use the case of, let's say, Rwanda, for instance, as an example, in Africa, South Africa. After so many years of apartheid in South Africa, there was a genuine forgiveness. If at least on the part of many, maybe not all South Africans would have forgiven, or black South Africans would have forgiven white South Africans, but a number of black South Africans have actually forgiven the past and have moved on. But how did it happen? For those South Africans who have actually moved economically, I happen to have studied in South Africa. I stayed there for 4 years, and I would say that a first-degree holder in South Africa is far better than a PhD holder in most cases in Nigeria. Because once you have a first degree, you'll be able to write a brand new car, you'll be able to get a mortgage. And so these are people who are supposed to be keen into the violence, but they are out of it because they have actually made some progress in terms of economy. So if we can do this in this part of the world, we would have helped in solving the problem. So people who get out of conflict, they've lost everything. There is no any form of getting back. We're not talking about compensation now because people can start up rehabilitation so that the person picks up their lives and continues. So that is one aspect. So, but I think the key is the forgiveness. Once we don't forgive, and by forgiving doesn't mean we will forget. And then so I believe that we need to learn how to forgive, and then those issues that led to this crisis have to be talked about and looked at in the face. And, from my reading of peace and conflict building, honesty in terms of negotiation is one aspect that I think we've always swept under the carpet. So the history of a people is being pushed aside. Some will come another day and say, okay, what was our history before and how come did this matter happen? But if the right thing had been done, then people will have little or nothing.
You know, Dr. Philip Hayab, thank you, and Professor Yahya, also the other guys, thanks a lot. The one major takeaway, of course, Kieran and I, we are media people,
Yes.
and a subject matter that we may consider, Kieran, has to do with the true elements of forgiveness. The true elements of forgiveness. Because if we were to ask the guests now to start debating that, we're going to spend another hour or more on it. You talked about apology. Who should apologize? When should that apology be tendered? Talked about honesty in negotiation. Talked also about justice.
And in some cases where somebody's house was is raised down during conflict.
That's right.
Where does he live after that?
Precisely.
Even after apologizing, does he get back the house? Who is going to compensate him to these are
Reconstruction.
that make people not to forget.
Absolutely.
And they will want to retaliate.
That's right.
Back
And
conflict all over again.
that's right. That's what's called talionis. That's revenge. Both our guests in Kaduna and Jos, I don't know. You guys are pretty lengthy speakers. I want you to be as precise as possible in this. You know, the media and its role are issues that have also come up, even if tangentially, in this conversation. Bad good news that also comes out from your work. Kaduna City, Zaria, and Kafanchan, Momale tells us those cities have been quiescent. Now, how did you achieve this, and why isn't there media focus on what has been achieved, as well as the Peace Commission in Plateau State? But gentlemen, I think that these issues will have to be in abeyance. Because our producer and director are already telling us that we're out of time. So, from Jos, we'd like to appreciate Joseph Legman, Director General, Plateau Peace Building Agency. Thanks a lot for being our guest. Dr. Saleh Bomale, Kaduna State Peace Commission, is the Executive Vice Chair. Thanks also for the insights you have provided. Here in the studios, Dr. Philip Hayab, teacher, peace advocate, and conflict analyst. And Professor Muhammad Kuta Yahya, peace advocate. Deep thanks for the incisive insights you brought into our discussion this morning. Let's go over now to our sports desk.